Before I was born, my parents had a daughter who unfortunately passed away at an early age when my mom was expecting me. Since then, my mom has sunk into a deep sadness, not finding the strength to continue living her life as before. During this difficult period, my father had to assume much of the responsibility for my upbringing. My relationship with my mom remained strained throughout my childhood and adolescence. I often heard stories about my departed sister, whom I never got to know. My mom grieved deeply on the day my sister was born and the day she found out she was pregnant. On those days, she would pick me up from school and we couldn't do anything. On Christmas, which we didn't celebrate, Mom would say that without my sister, the holiday was meaningless. If I expressed a desire to celebrate my birthday, my mom reacted very emotionally. She would throw parties, decorate the house and yard with pictures of my sister for all the guests to see. Mom convinced me that this was how we invited my sister to my celebrations. The arrival of friends was accompanied by continuous stories about my sister, which created an awkward atmosphere. As a teenager, having started dating my future wife, I tried to keep her away from my mom. At the first meeting, my mom again only talked about my sister, showed her baby pictures and home videos, ignoring everything else. My wife was interested in my childhood and wanted to see my pictures, but Mom couldn't stop. When I left home, our relationship with my mom deteriorated even more. I decided not to stop living life to the fullest and started celebrating Christmas, which caused my mom's anger. She accused me of indifference to my sister's death and called me a monster for being able to rejoice in days of shared grief. For several years, we had little contact until one day my mom called me. In that conversation, I told her she needed help as I couldn't continue to live like this. She apologized and promised to make it right. Recently, my wife and I were expecting a daughter. My mom, upon learning of this, enthusiastically stated that she couldn't wait to meet baby Ella, which was the name of my deceased sister. I explained that we hadn't chosen that name, which alarmed Mom. She insisted that we were obligated to name our daughter after her sister, arguing that Ella deserved to be honored and remembered. I asked her to stop, but she continued to insist and even tried to convince my wife to do so. I replied that I would never name my daughter after my sister after such a reaction. I regretted reconnecting with my mom because she would never stop making all of life a center of loss. My mom called me an evil idiot for my desire to forget my sister, claiming that I have no love for her. Now that's really not easy when your whole life is spent in the shadow of your mom's grief for her daughter. It's too bad she didn't get to fully enjoy being your mom. You are absolutely not an idiot. This is your daughter and your wife, and only the two of you have the right to choose her name. The fact that your mom assumed the girl would be named Ella and then reacted so violently to the other choice only confirms that she hasn't changed. Best to keep your distance for your peace of mind. Congratulations to you and your wife. You seem to be on the verge of cutting off contact with your mom. The likelihood of her allowing her to spend time alone with the baby is extremely slim. She may get her daughter's things out of the attic and insist that you take them. That dress Ella came home in from the hospital should be worn by your Ella. This is Ella's first word, her favorite toy. All of these things she thinks should be a part of your daughter's life. Any mention that your daughter is not an outgrowth of your sister can drive her to extremes. It's unbearable for a young child who doesn't understand why grandma yells at him just because he said he likes dogs more than cats. Can you imagine what would happen if your mom started to really believe that this child was actually her daughter? It could cause her condition to deteriorate further. I'm sorry you grew up in Ella's shadow. It's also unclear if your mom ever sought therapy to help with her grief. I'm sorry you couldn't fully be yourself and celebrate because Ella died. That must have been very hard. Your mom has to work through her grief on her own. Next story. My wife works in a college student dormitory. Students come to her with questions about housing or other problems. She doesn't worry too much about it. The income from her job allows us to buy groceries. However, if she didn't work, we could save money for daycare for our youngest child. Thus, all other expenses fall on my shoulders. We have a comfortable home and are firmly established in our neighborhood. I have a stable job and am moving up the career ladder. The beginning of the problems came with my wife's desire to change jobs. I was fine with that, as she was not happy in her position. But that all changed when she applied for a position at a school in another state. She received an offer that would move her up the career ladder. Despite the opportunities for growth, The income would be much lower than my current income. She shared with me her desire to accept the offer. I said it was a terrible idea. This sparked an argument. During the discussion, she argued that my job was more important. I confirmed this by mentioning that it is my job that supports our standard of living. She called me an idiot and has since stopped talking to me. Moving would have meant a temporary loss of my job for me. She seeks to change her family situation and influence my job for career advancement, despite the low level of her current earnings. Such a decision could lead to failure both financially and professionally. It is important to evaluate how beneficial a potential job change is for both of us. If I were you, I would advise her to consider a move into a higher-paying field with better job opportunities, such as medicine or programming. Perhaps she would be happy with the prospect of a career in a new field. You're right in wanting to keep your good job, since you've been working there for a long time. From the way you describe it, it would be unfair to lose that because of her job. However, it sounds like you need to improve your communication. There is probably a compromise that will allow you to keep your career and her to feel supported and fulfilled. In my opinion, all parties are acting rashly. Your wife should not expect you to quit your job. However, it is also unacceptable for you to completely ignore her aspirations. Instead of asserting your superiority, it is better to discuss the underlying issues and find common ground. I think your wife's suggestion is unrealistic. I can't understand that level of selfishness and lack of a realistic view of the situation. If there are no jobs in the place she wants to move to, this should have been seriously discussed before applying and planning the move. Selling your property and moving without financial gain seems unreasonable. Now I want to tell a different story. I, a 33-year-old woman, recently married my husband of 30 years. We decided to honeymoon in Mexico and took a 3-hour flight. I fly frequently for business, so I have accumulated a lot of frequent flyer miles. Unlike me, my husband doesn't like flying, although he does manage, especially holding my hand during takeoff and landing. When I booked my tickets, I asked to use my miles for a possible upgrade to business class, but only if 2 seats were available. We pretty much forgot about it until the day of the flight. I checked in online, full of anticipation for the trip. Everything was going smoothly until we were stopped by an airline employee upon boarding. She informed us that my husband had been upgraded to business class, but only him. I immediately stated that this was unacceptable as we wanted to stay together. My husband intervened, saying it was fine and went to business class. I was left in shock at his decision. He knew that I often fly business class and he didn't. I felt we were holding up the line and decided not to argue. I headed to my seat, feeling resentful. My husband smiled as he took his seat in business class, while I sat next to an elderly woman with a baby on her lap. A few minutes later, holding back tears, I realized that my husband had used my miles for an upgrade, leaving me alone on a wedding flight. An hour after takeoff, he approached me, offered me half of his breakfast from business class, and asked why I was ignoring him. He was scared and needed my support. I replied, "Maybe you should have thought of that earlier." He got angry and stated that this might be his only chance to fly business class. He added that he was sharing his breakfast to compensate and that I could support him. I rolled my eyes and said, "Thank you." He went back to his seat. Upon landing, I tried to pace myself and forget what had happened so I could enjoy my honeymoon. However, he still felt resentful since I didn't reassure him before takeoff. Now I wonder if I was wrong. Perhaps I really should have let him enjoy business class and assured him that everything would be fine. It's not your fault. Your husband made a really questionable decision that he had to live with. He jumped at the chance to sit alone in business class. It doesn't seem to have occurred to him how obviously he was violating your shared space on the flight, despite his phobia. He is a grown man who apparently had a great experience on takeoff. If he really needed your help, he wouldn't have asked for it after his food had already been served. It looks like he used his need for you as a weapon to make you feel obligated to forgive him for a rather inappropriate choice. After all, this is your honeymoon and this was supposed to be a time for both of you, which is why his behavior is so annoying. He complains, trying to dodge responsibility for his selfish act. "This may be my only chance," he says, "but there's a time and place for everything, and your honeymoon is definitely not the time for a selfie." "I'm so scared, how can you be mad at me?" he asks. "It's all about him, and this is just the beginning of your marriage. How will this affect the rest of your life together?" If he is so selfish and incapable of showing common sense and understanding, you will face many more moments like this in the months and years to come. My next story. My wife is not particularly good at saving things. She often chooses inexpensive items and replaces them when they break or wear out. I, on the other hand, try to buy only high-quality items according to my budget. We discussed this difference in approach before we got married. At that time, I expressed my concerns about the safety of my things and asked her not to use them. At first, everything went smoothly. However, things changed when the pans from the dollar store started sticking. She took my Williams-Sonoma skillet and scratched its ceramic coating badly. I had to replace it. She also accidentally damaged my laptop. After calculating the tax refund, we split the amount. She was surprised at the remaining amount. I reminded her that the expense of replacing damaged items is substantial. She thought $200 for a frying pan was ridiculous. Asking for a reasonable price, she pointed to $10. A week went by. She cooked exclusively in her cookware, and the food did not taste good. When she took my OR skillet for a dinner for my parents, I sent her a link to a website to show her the replacement cost. I'm not going to divorce her. It's important that she keep my stuff safe or replace it when damaged. She thinks I'm being picky and petty. You value quality and thrift, whereas she prefers cheap goods and convenience. Don't worry, your stuff will last you for years. You'll have to replace it repeatedly. The environmental consequences of such purchases are significant. After all that garbage is generated because she thinks things are disposable. She can end up spending a lot more money to replace the same item. You call her an idiot, but I realize you don't want a divorce. However, how are you going to bridge the value gap between you? I wish you luck. I hope she can learn from you. Why was he paying from the joint account? He didn't damage the property he paid for. She did the damage and should be held financially responsible. I suggest that in the future she cover the damage from her own account. What's the point of marriage if you have separate pots and pans and don't agree on anything? I don't like the way she cooks. Don't trust her. Yes, you are unhappy in your marriage. She's not going to pay from her account even though that would be the fairest thing to do. They'll have to use their joint account, so she'll cover some of the damage. My inner psychic says she may divorce him because she likes to throw away everything of value and doesn't value anything. Her reasoning is that he is too picky and keeps score. A story that really surprised me. My parents divorced when I was 7 years old. At first, my father visited me every week, but when I turned 10, his visits became less frequent. He only came once a month. Yesterday was a particularly hard day. We put my cat, who had spent his whole life with me, to sleep. It was the same day of my father's wedding. I told him in advance that I wouldn't be able to attend. I needed to be there for the cat in her last moments of life. My father reacted rudely to my refusal. He argued that I shouldn't put an animal above his wedding. I reminded him that this was his 4th marriage. At the previous 2, I had been present. This provoked his anger and yelling. As a result, I hung up on him. This morning he expressed his disappointment. I replied that I didn't want to see him if he continued to behave this way. He reminded me of my rights to see him, but I pointed out that I turned 18 6 months ago. He shouldn't come if he cares so little for me that he can't even remember my birthday date. My half-sister tried to talk me out of being so hard on my father. She argued that it wouldn't solve the problem. You're not an idiot, although you could have picked a different day to put the cat to sleep. After all, this is Dad's 4th wedding. At some point you did your duty. He's probably scared and angry because you're an adult now and can just cut off contact with him if you wish. Perhaps you could have chosen a different day. No, I'm really sorry about your cat. I don't think we need to talk about it, but don't let anyone convince you that it would have been better to leave your cat to suffer longer for the sake of your father's 4th wedding. It seems the cat has been around longer than the 4th wife. Your father didn't find time to visit you, but he found it for 2 failed marriages. Now, on to the next thing. Since your parents divorced, he's made it clear what his priorities are. He's selfish and being a father was a secondary thought for him. I'm sorry you have a father like that. Your sister may need more time to realize that about him. Seeing your parents' faults is harder when you're young.
Thank you so much for watching my video and your time. Please subscribe to my channel and click on the bell button. Also, I am very interested to know your personal opinion about the story. You can write it in the comments. I will definitely read it and reply to you personally.